This meeting is being recorded.
And we're good. Got one more joining right now, so we'll just wait a sec. Okay, so welcome everyone to our webinar on perfectionism. I felt very strongly about putting together a webinar on this topic, or I should say asking Jessa to put together a webinar on this topic, because it is something that kind of plagues the field of genetic counseling in general. Genetic counselors tend to be very prone to perfectionism. And so as you enter this phase of life where you're going through school and then starting your career, and then just as humans, there are many things about life that can be improved if we let go of some of these perfectionist tendencies. And of course, our goal as GC Prep is to improve your chances of matching and getting into a program. But we also want to help you have happy lives, right, in the best way that we can. So a couple things just before we start. It's not lost on me that we're talking to people who may struggle with perfectionist tendencies about how that's not a good thing, right? And that concept can trigger some anxiety for perfectionists, right? That they're doing something that might not be healthy. And so if we leave this webinar feeling anxiety that you have to improve and not be a perfectionist anymore, like we've missed the goal a little bit, right? Because we want to approach this as we have an opportunity to get better, to be kinder to ourselves, to improve our lives. But I don't want this to be something that you spend a lot of time like negatively talking to yourself that you're not good enough, right, on this, okay? So if you have any questions about that, we'll try to repeat that concept over and over again in this webinar, but it really is meant to help show you where the pitfalls are and then help you know how to move beyond these thoughts of perfectionism, but it's not meant to make you feel bad about yourself if you do have these tendencies, okay? So what we'll do today, we'll go ahead and turn it over to Jessa. She's going to talk about kind of what perfectionism is, what it looks like, the kind of thoughts and feelings that many perfectionists tend to have, and talk to us a little bit about that. We'll move to Janelle, who is an assistant program director at the Sarah Lawrence program, and she's going to tell us about how she has seen perfectionism play out in grad school amongst her students and how that's really impacted them and kind of the vibe of that student group when you have multiple people who are perfectionists. I'll talk for a little bit about perfectionism that I've seen in the workplace and also home. And then we'll kind of punt it back to Jessa, who's going to talk about, well, so what do we do to kind of let go of these tendencies and how do we kind of get out of this pattern so that we can be healthier and kind of take more control of letting go of that anxiety and being okay with mistakes, right? So with that, we'll go ahead and turn it over to you, Jessa.
Awesome. 2 disclaimers. 1, I have a dog and he loves barking at very inopportune times. Some of you who've been on calls with me already know this, but just wanted to give that little caveat. And then the other disclaimer, I just want to say, so a lot of times perfectionistic tendencies can go hand in hand with certain underlying conditions. However, it's not always the case. And just in general, I wanted to clarify that none of us are acting as therapists in this role of this webinar that we're giving. Do you feel like you might have an underlying something, seek help? That's kind of the disclaimer for today, but let me kind of dive right in. It'll let me. There we go. Oh, too far. All right. So kind of a very busy slide just to start off, but essentially kind of read through some of these. I'll read a few out loud, but kind of a question to answer to yourself is, do you agree with any of these? Do you feel yourself doing any of these? So for instance, having high standards that end up being difficult to maintain over time or even meet. Criticizing yourself when you don't meet your typically high unreachable standards. fear of failure or feeling like you always fail. Completely discounting achievements that you see not as perfect. Sacrificing interests, relationships, even rest to make sure that you're achieving. Procrastinating in some ways. So for instance, avoiding or postponing tasks where you think there's even a slight chance of failure. Pushing yourself to the point of feeling overwhelmed, even possibly depressed and exhausted. Judging your self-worth essentially in the terms of success and achievements versus any of the other ways you can judge your self-worth, which we'll talk about in a little bit. So just kind of reflect on, do some of these make sense to you? And if so, I mean, other people are probably feeling the same things. So let me just go into a little bit more detail. There's other things that it can look like, such as these expectations actually being unspoken. So they're your standards. They might be inspired by, work or friends or the general public or society, but they're kind of unspoken. If you were to ask somebody about your standard, most people would probably be like, wow, that's really difficult to meet. And then specifically needing very clear organization, structure, rules, etc. An exaggerated fear of failure. So not just like, oh man, it would really suck if I failed, but more devastating where it does impact your life and you might avoid some things. Being overly ambitious or driven, high levels of insecurity and self-doubt. Not being able to overlook small mistakes. And then kind of in tandem with that is viewing any mistake as a failure or even an incompetence. An intense fear of being judged or rejected due to any mistakes. Spending too much time, effort, or energy to improve or even reduce mistakes. Excessive rumination and even self-criticism. Being over-prepared and needing to have a plan 100% of the time. And being very rigid and not being able to deviate from said plan. Being unable to take criticism, so essentially being sensitive to any feedback. I did write the word negative, but in general, I've been trying to kind of think about feedback is neutral. We as humans apply the positive or negative aspect to it. But in general, even if it's positive, just simply feedback, you tend to be a little bit more sensitive. Black or white thinking. So only this or that, nothing in between, nothing outside of that realm. And then just in general, kind of essentially having a low self-worth and self-esteem that ends up being contingent upon success. So a lot of things. So that was a lot. Anyone else feel exhausted from reading it? Because that's kind of how I feel in general when I do have my own perfectionistic tendencies. So it's, again, trying to convey that it can lead to exhaustion, but it can also hold you back because, I mean, do you want to go run a marathon if you're tired? I'm probably not. So just as an example, some ways that it can hold you back. You experience stress with the slightest change to plans. You spend hours on tasks that were honestly likely already completed. You can miss deadlines by trying to make things perfect, thereby probably in your own mind creating a cycle of I made a mistake because you were late. You likely end up losing out on important sleep, emphasis on important sleep. In general, you end up feeling a sense of stress and exhaustion, and possibly even ending up leading to a depressed state. And then in general, you actually have a lower quality of life. And you may or may not end up feeling that at some point when you become aware of your perfectionistic tendencies? So like, where does it come from? Kind of mentioned society kind of inspires some of our thoughts, but reality is it comes likely from anxiety. Again, that's an underlying feature, but most importantly, fear of failure. I'm just going to point out that you are going to have failures. You are not going to be a failure, but you are going to have failures, but you are also going to have successes. My thing to kind of point out is like, where do you want to spend more of that energy? Do you want to spend it focusing on hopefully not having failures, or really spend it towards those successes, which will actually give you time to then enjoy those successes? All right. Any questions before, or thoughts before we move on?
I'll just chime in with like one little thing here. Oh, that was really good. A lot of times, perfectionism can be like a learned behavior, right? So either sometimes those ideas or encouragement like that can be sometimes leveraged upon us by our family, or sometimes their encouragement to do well in school and do the best we can becomes translated in our mind when we're little to do the best, right? Instead of just do your best, right? And so I don't want you guys to feel like it's my fault that I have these traits, because a lot of times it's not. But now that we are here, and now if you have identified these traits in yourself, then that gives you power to try to move forward and let some of those things go. Janelle, go ahead.
Yeah, thanks for the baton pass. I'm actually going to ask if you could take off the slides. I'd like to have a conversation.
Absolutely, as soon as I figure out how.
All right, so when you're a student, when we have the students, perfectionism often holds back students from learning. That's really my biggest concern and my worry, I guess, as someone who's trying to train people to become genetic counselors. There's this weird thing that occurs. For me, it's weird. For the perfectionist, I'm sure it's not weird at all. But for me, it's weird because we do not have any expectation that the students will be perfect or get everything right when they do this for the first time. But you can tell that that's the expectation that many of the students have. So they're approaching the first time they do a role play, the first time they work with simulated patients, the first time that they're, in clinic, that they're going to do everything perfectly. And just like Jessica, I mean, everything that Jessica pointed out earlier is correct in that, like, there's this high expectation that you're like all these added pressures that you're putting on yourself really hold you back from giving it a go. So the story that I'll tell you is that we literally had students who were working with some of our simulated patients. These are simulated patients. For those of you who don't know what simulated patients are, these are actors who are taught to act like patients in a particular way in order to teach a skill set to the healthcare provider in training. And we all know that it's not a real patient. There's one level removed of, like, you don't know the simulated patient, unlike if you did a role play with like a classmate. So like the stakes are definitely a little bit higher, but it's not a real patient. And yet several of the students joined in the session before the session even started and just started crying. And we were trying to figure, like nobody said anything. What's going on? Where are the tears coming from? And what was expressed was just this, like, oh my God, I'm so scared I'm not going to be good at this. And this idea to want to do it perfectly. And I'm like, of course, all of us are like, who said that was the expectation? Like, that's not our expectation. In fact, we understand you're doing this for the first time. So there's probably going to be a lot of things that are like not done absolutely correctly. And that's okay. Like, this is the playground that you're in to learn from that. but it just, it like the crying was such that like it almost prevented them from doing anything. They almost didn't even work with the simulated patients because we were now talking about what they were going through. And so that's what we mean by like, it can stop you from doing things. It can hold you back, even from being a genetic counselor, like learning what it takes to be a genetic counselor. And anyone who's come to any of the open houses at Sarah Lawrence probably heard me say that grad school is hard. And I want to redefine that after a conversation I had with a colleague of mine. You're signing up not only for something that's difficult, but you're signing up. You are paying to fail. You're paying to fail multiple times over and over again. And what happens with perfectionism is that a lot of times people who are living with perfectionist thoughts believe that failure means I am a failure, right? So for those of you who know Brene Brown, she has this, she's a shame expert, but she has this saying that I think about constantly, which is if perfectionism is in the passenger seat, shame is driving the car. And the difference between shame and guilt is I did something bad. Shame is I am bad. And if you are bad, that means I am a failure. I am defective. I'm not right. I'm not going to do it, right? So if that's the way you're thinking, right? Perfectionists usually are thinking in this like, oh, I didn't fail. I didn't do something incorrectly. I am like, all of a sudden it's like, I'm a failure. They can see me. They can see that like, I'm never going to be good at this, right? Like that's the kind of like thought process that's really happening. And so again, just like Michaela was saying earlier, we're not saying that this is your fault. We're not saying like, shame on you. Definitely not trying to put shame on you for having these thoughts. That's not it. It's more like just asking to take a moment to become aware, because awareness is what's going to help you to identify, oh, I'm having these thoughts. I'm creating certain expectations for myself, like I'm, all of that. You can just identify it. And with the identification, then you can start to try and figure out like, okay, what can I do to like change these thinking and change this type of thinking? And so to wrap up, I just want to encourage everyone to take a mindset of growth and learning. Failure just means that you didn't hit the target spot on, right? That's all it means. That's literally all it means. So you can learn from that. Maybe you need to just switch your aim a little bit, right? Maybe you need to like change the way that you do certain things. In the genetic counseling world, we're talking about word choice, listening to the patient a little bit more, understanding a certain genetic concept better, right? Like you just need to do things just a little bit differently in order to just hit the mark. And so I would also encourage you to, instead of thinking that you need to take on a stance of perfection, it's more of aiming for excellence. That's the target, excellence. And excellence just means doing the best that you can. Perfection is impossible, as by definition, humans are imperfect. So continue to be excellent. Oh, one other thing I was going to say, as students, I also want to talk about applicants. We can see that in interviews, by the way. We can see the perfectionism coming out, and it's because you sound canned. You sound like a robot. It sounds too polished, your answer, like you didn't really give it any thought. And those are things that we actually are looking out for and concern us. So if you already have perfectionist tendencies during the interview, it doesn't encourage us to want to like work with you, because we know it's going to be a challenge for everyone. Like for everyone, this is going to be something that's really difficult, and it has nothing to do with us, right? Like it's because this person has to work through some stuff. So I think it's a good idea to identify these things now, so that way you can work on them during the interview process and then when you become a student.
Yeah.
Okay.
Absolutely. Thank you. And just before I take over here, I want to do a little poll of the 3 counselors on this call. So raise your hand if you made mistakes during your interview process. Raise your hand if you made mistakes as a student. And how about in your first year of being a genetic counselor? How about this year as being a genetic counselor? Yeah, that's normal. Okay, it's a normal process. You will make mistakes. It's fine. You actually learn more from your mistakes than you do when you do it right, right? And I've seen that a lot. So I have a 6-year-old. He might be slightly on the spectrum. He's extremely smart, but he has a hard time managing when he does not do something perfectly the first time and he has a little meltdown, right? And sometimes I wonder if like I played a role in that a little bit when he was younger and he'd do something really well and I'd say, oh, that's great, that's perfect. And I didn't think about that word when I was trying to praise him. And I've tried to consciously remove that word from our descriptions of things, and especially of like my kids' behavior, because there's no way for them to be perfect all the time. And so if that's their standard, then I'm kind of setting them up to feel like a failure all the time. I've also been in multiple work situations where the management was run by someone who was perfectionist. Right? I had a position where kind of the person in charge of everything had extremely, extremely high standards that were impossible to meet. And when people around them inevitably made mistakes, they got berated and they got criticized for those mistakes. And that is one of the dangers, I think, of perfectionism is right now, and I think in the first part of our lives, when we're feeling perfectionism, it's often like turned inward, and that criticism is of ourselves and our behavior. But as we kind of progress through our career and we move into positions of power, which means we shift away from being students and into a career, and then all of a sudden as a genetic counselor, you are in a position of power over your patients because you have information that they need. And in your role within the clinic, as you gain more and more experience and more years in your career, you're likely to take on more tasks and more responsibility and gain more like power, higher seniority over people in the clinic. And at that point, perfectionism can start negatively impacting those who are working for you or trying to report to you. And when I was in those situations, as a new grad and someone who is still like or just new to the role and trying to figure out like how do I do this well, right? Of course you're going to make mistakes in that situation, but it really made me incredibly self-conscious because I didn't know what was I lost the ability to determine what was reasonable and what was reality, because the expectation was so high to be perfect that I wasn't sure, like, is this something that like reasonably I should have known about and like that's like a major error on my part, or is this something that like most people in my position would not know that they should really be teaching me? And so if we have typically very high achieving, very smart people coming into these places of power, but they haven't taken steps to mitigate their perfectionism, then it can cause a lot of pain and uncertainty and self-conscious of the people who are below them. And I did a lot of research, when I was in that position on like what to do if your boss is like a perfectionist. I was like asking the internet, what do you do? Like, how do you manage this situation? And the advice was you leave, because it's not going to get better unless they are able to recognize that they're creating an unhealthy situation, which often doesn't happen, right? So these traits that we have, which have driven you all to succeed, to have high goals, like of becoming a genetic counselor, to achieve well in your college courses, and really have expectations for your life, that's all good things. And there's nothing wrong with putting your best foot forward and wanting to do the best of your abilities. That's totally fine. We're not saying make mistakes on purpose. But what we are saying is when it happens, you be kind to yourself and recognize, oh, that's okay, right? That I will do that probably better next time. Let me make a mental note that this did not go the way that I had planned or the way that I'd wanted. And then we leave it there. We separate the emotional baggage from that mental note that we can improve, right? And that's where perfectionism really is causing an issue, is because like the failure and the self-value are so closely tied that we just want to make sure that we separate those things. Any questions on that, or any thoughts or concerns or anything you guys want to bring up? Nope.
I like that you, if it's okay, I like that you
Yeah.
talked about associating value with like outcomes and perfectionism. And that was something that I struggled a lot with. So like academic validation was a huge thing, obviously growing up and then through undergrad. And I was the kind of person who never wanted to take a gap year. So I was like, I know I want to do this. And now it's been interesting to have some years where I've worked and learned that you don't get gold stars all the time, and like you don't get an A+ on a paper or whatever. And it's been interesting to like seek out other areas of validation that aren't immediately attached to like an outcome, like a direct outcome or something. So I'm glad I didn't go like straight through into school, because I feel like that might be what like trips people up sometimes, if they go like straight through and they're used to that academic validation, and then you get into a career and you're like, wait.
But yeah, and there's a lot of and thank you for that, because as we learn more about life, and whether that is the things that happen to us, and some people that takes many years for them to gain that type of life experience, other people have had hard lives and they learn it very young, but there's more than one way to assess a person, and school assesses one way, and that's, can you study, right? And that's the only thing it tells us, right? It doesn't even really tell us a whole lot about a person's IQ, because there are some people who have lower IQs, but they have a lot of effort, and so they get good grades, and there are other people who have really high IQs and they put barely any effort and they get high scores. So a good GPA doesn't really tell us anything about a person's work ethic. And it certainly doesn't tell me anything about what's important to them value-wise, or how good of a human emotionally they are to other humans, right? And there's so many other ways to assess someone, to assess ourselves, to assign value to the things that we do and the things that we're good at, that aren't measurable by a grade or like a trade skill. Like computer programming, someone could be like really great at computer programming. All that means is that they're really great at computer programming. It doesn't mean that they're a good person, right? That doesn't have anything to do with it. And so as we explore these other ways of putting value on our life, putting value on ourselves, that are completely independent of how other people could score us, it helps us be more comfortable with ourselves too, and just like living in our own skin. And I can say for myself, I've been in therapy for like 5 years, and I'm like not shy about that. I think everybody should go to therapy. But one of the things for me that I found really valuable in therapy is it's helped me be able to accept the things that I am not good at, and be able to see more clearly the things that I am good at, and be able to like recognize the value of these intangible things that I do well. And that has improved my life and my self-confidence and the way I experience the world so much. And that didn't even happen until my 30s. So if I could share anything with my younger self, it's like, let go of this idea that you have to be perfect or do it better than anyone. Doing your best doesn't mean having to be the best, because that's just impossible. Other thoughts or questions? Thank you for commenting, Kareem.
I also want to share one of my thoughts, because I come from an Asian background, and then I'm not sure if you guys know, like in Asian culture, like you just said, like the school is the number one thing for the students. GPA is the number one thing. That's the only thing the parents will see. So when I was during my childhood, there's one sentence my mother always tell me that is, I can forgive you anything. You like break something, you missing something, you lost your money, like that's all small things. The only one thing I cannot forgive you is you did bad on your exam or your test. Like the GPA is the only thing they see. So I think luckily I got the opportunity to go to Canada and during my high school time, and then I think high school time, university time is the time you really build up your values, and you really know your values are like what you're going to go through, and your personality form up during that time. And I find that the Western culture and the Asian culture is one big thing is the Western culture kind of like, especially in Canada, like things go slowly. You can make mistake. That's okay. Like the first time, second time, even third time. So like when I come from a research background, like when I first time try the techniques, like I did some stupid things, but people always tell me, well, I did great. Like they always tell me what I did better. They never count on what I did bad thing. So that helped me kind of like putting down my grades. Like I always tell myself the grades is not the only thing I should look at. I should always think about what I did, what I contribute. The other parts are also very important in my life. Yeah.
Thank you for sharing that. I think that's really valuable to hear that perspective. So thank you very much. Any other thoughts?
Hi, my name is Josiah, and I applied this cycle, and I'm gonna try my best to like organize my thoughts here because I have a lot just listening to Janelle and you as well, Michaela. You know, in the beginning, I was hearing Janelle talk about the whole like standardized patient experience, and I actually volunteered as one for like it was a virtual opportunity for a program, and I remember just as I was like preparing for that, and then ultimately as I was doing the mock patient session, I just thought about how many times that I like, you know, had a verbal pause. I said, and I actually went into this like shame spiral where it was like, you know, I don't know if I can, you know, actually see myself, you know, counseling patients. And, you know, I wasn't even the counselor in that situation, but it was just really like, I think difficult because I struggle a lot with like wanting to make sure that my words are absolutely perfect. And I think just being in this space, like hearing how you guys have said there's been a lot of mistakes that you've made and overcome was just really helpful knowing that. And also to talk about like the GPA aspect too. I think like I was so close to not applying. I think the only reason why I applied this cycle is because I took like a year and a half, like so nearly 2 years as a gap year, just kind of trying to beef up my resume and, you know, get involved in things that I love doing. Because, you know, I found that, you know, like my weak point was my GPA for the most part. And it was just like really difficult to even sit down and try and like write a personal statement and seek out recommendation letters. It was like a complete just, it was really chaotic even going through like all the checklists of everything I needed to do, because I thought that, you know, my GPA was like ruined and there was just like no, like there wasn't any point to it. But yeah, I mean, I think about how like there's other areas that we have strengths in. And I think what drew me to genetic counseling more than anything was how, you know, personable it was. And it has that like humanizing aspect in healthcare that I didn't really see in other careers. And so I like how you also said, Michaela, about just like normalizing therapy. I find that a lot of people in this space too, like they tend to be, I'm sorry if it's like a generalization, but they've also struggled with their mental health. And I think that's probably what drew them to the field even more, because they wanted to like offer something more to patients who probably haven't been able to like have that like holistic support, like besides just their physical health. And so yeah, I don't know if that wasn't really coherent, but anyways, it was, I think.
I actually really liked all of your thoughts. Thank you for sharing them. Yeah, and I agree with what you said, right? That a lot of people that come to the field of genetic counseling are doing so because they care a lot about other people. That what happens when you care a lot about other people is you tend to feel what they're feeling, and a lot of people are not okay, right? Especially in the moments when we're talking to them, which is sometimes like the worst part of their lives, when either themselves or a loved one is getting like a genetic diagnosis that could be a massive deal, right? And so because there's so much empathy and wanting to help people have a better experience, even though we can't fix the situation, we're trying to like guide them through this process, help mitigate their suffering in any way that we can with information, let them have choices, and let them still feel control as much as we can in this whole genetic counseling process. All of that empathy that makes us good at that also predisposes us to like really soak up kind of this like unhealthy burden, right? That can come across when we can't separate ourselves from those feelings, right? That's called compassion fatigue. You'll talk about it in school because it's a big thing for genetic counselors. And there is a direct correlation between compassion fatigue and perfectionism, because a perfectionist wants to fix things, right? They want to make it better. And we can't fix really the situation for our patients a lot of the time. We can just support them through it. And so there's going to be this like fundamental like discoordination. I'm like not remembering the exact word I'm like looking for, but like two things that are not achievable at the same time. Whoever's got that word, please throw it out there. Let me know.
Talking about cognitive dissonance.
Yeah, there you go. Where you want to be perfect and do a perfect thing, but you like literally can't in that situation. They're mutually exclusive. There you go. That's what I was looking for, right? And so accepting now that you're never going to be perfect and that you can never like fix things for your patients is going to be a lot healthier for you mentally and help protect yourself from this compassion fatigue that can sometimes then lead to burnout and major career changes if it's not addressed. Now if we like put up these protections against ourselves. And Lisa, again, I totally agree with you about GPA. I've seen people who have like amazing GPAs and they don't get interviews because they're not able to show these other values that programs are wanting to see. And people who have significantly lower GPAs that do get matched to a program because they are able to communicate through their paper and then in their interview that they of course can do the scholastic work, but they also have like a broader understanding of what would make a person a good genetic counselor. And it's not being excellent at everything all the time, right? It's being able to meet their patient at the bottom, right? It's being able to, when a patient lashes out at you, to be able to accept that, you know what, that stung my pride, but it actually wasn't about me. And I'm not a terrible person. I didn't do a terrible job. It was, they were in a really like bad spot. So even though that hurts and I feel bad about it, that's not something that I have to carry with me for a long time. So thank you for those comments. I'll go ahead and turn it back over to Jessa. Now she's got some activities that I want to make sure we get to. And this might go over a little bit. So if you do need to head out early, that's totally fine. Well, we're probably not going to respect the hour time limit. But I just wanted to make sure we get these things in there because it's all good information that we're covering today.
Okay. Everyone can see my screen again? Yeah, cool. So I've had it like a few times. So just kind of going off of stories that other people have shared. I've had a few times in life where I was like, oh wow, this is not helpful in this moment. And reflecting that I didn't like it. So what do I change? So for me, one of the examples I'll talk about is during grad school, because I'm sure we'll all get to that point and we will all have stories about when this happened to us. So I was in my second year and I obsessed over my preparations for seeing patients. I was like, because I'm a student, I won't be able to tell them, hold on, let me look up that and get back to you because I'm not going to be the next one that sees the patient. So my brain translated that to must be perfect, must like have all the things I might need for that one session that I will only be seeing. So at the end of the rotation, my supervisors said both a great and a not so great thing in my perfectionistic mind. So you are the best student we have ever had, but we are still giving you a B. I wasn't even upset. I was like, okay, so I spent all this time. And so like, you know, because again, grad school kind of about the grade. So it helped me to reflect like, that wasn't productive, right? Like I was over prepared for a patient I saw for 2 minutes. I prepared for hours. Like that's not a good use of my time. And then I still ended up with just a B. So I was like, okay, so if I can do my perfectionistic, in my mind, A+++ whatever work, and still get a B, what does my B level look like? And am I still going to do right by my patients? So I transitioned from caring about the grade and moved to what am I going to do that's going to be actually helpful for my patients? And ultimately, as a genetic counselor, once you're done with school, that's really the most important thing is, you know, how do you best support your patients? So that was my realization. And then I was like, okay, so what steps do I take? So the minute I spent not less time, like I spent time on my things, I still gave care and attention to it. But instead of spending hours, I might say, okay, if I'm meeting with a patient for 40 minutes, I might not need 4 hours of work. What makes sense to still feel prepared, especially as a student. So these are the changes I made, and I took them with me into real life. And still to this day, I will prepare and I will do less than I would in my perfectionist mind. And I will still leave a conversation with a patient, maybe having talked about one thing I prepared for. Everything else just kind of, it was what the patient needed. And I just was able to, or I called them back if I needed to look something up. So all that to say is I gave myself time in my life back to figure out what values I do have for myself that are not based on achievement. So how can we address some of these? I have a lot. These are things that worked for me. The caveat is I am me and you are not me. So what works for me might not work for you. But if you take some things from this and they're useful, that's awesome. So that's kind of the goal. So I will reiterate, Michaela, therapy has been awesome for honestly 2 reasons. It has helped greatly with my perfectionistic tendencies once I found the right therapist for me. And I actually feel like I'm a better counselor having gone to therapy because by being a patient in a setting where you're getting counseled really helps me understand more of that process for patients as well. But from a perfectionistic standpoint, if you suffer with perfectionistic tendencies, I highly discourage a therapist who loves to give you stars and stickers because you're just going to try to please that person instead of actually doing therapy. So that's why I say when I found the right therapist for me, I loved her. She was great, but I learned very quickly that I don't know if I was doing therapy or just trying to please my teacher, essentially. Anyway, so this can come with time and it happens gradually, and there might be some things that you'll notice here and there. But once you have a realization and an acceptance that you're spending too much time doing the same thing over and over again until your definition of perfect and not being able to truly do the things you enjoy, you're probably going to be like, but I want to do things I want to enjoy. So what has to change? And then I found throughout life that like when I had large or long lists, I would avoid them. I would never accomplish them. And I just felt I was setting myself up for failure because it was a long list. I started making that long list across multiple little chunks throughout a day. And I check things off all the time. And that is so satisfying, especially as a perfectionist. But for me, it's, did I touch it? Did I do whatever the thing is on there? Did I touch it in some capacity? As long as the deadline isn't tomorrow, did I do at least a little bit on it? If so, I'm done. I'm done for the day. That's it. That has been one of the like best things I've done for myself recently. I didn't know kind of how to phrase this, but some moments I'll be really critical of myself and I sometimes catch it. I don't always catch it, but when I catch it, I make myself aware and then I try and change the dialogue. So like, for instance, I was beating myself up the other day about why am I not good at communicating with people? And I said, you know what, not communicating, but like texting back or like consistently calling my grandmother. And I was like, you know what, it takes two people. They can call me also. And maybe it has nothing to do with that. What positive things can I say about like, what am I doing well? And I do call. And when I call, these are really great conversations. So so just kind of changing the narrative. Checking your goals multiple times to make sure they're realistic, because sometimes as perfectionists, we overshoot and our goals end up not being realistic. Kind of in relation to that, I do talk with friends, family, loved ones, etc., to kind of get a perspective. Like, does this make sense? Is it too much? Am I overdoing it? What would you do? Like, what would your goal be if you were in my shoes? Just to kind of make sure I'm not going in too deep with those perfectionistic tendencies. When I do notice things, I take a break and I come back to it because my brain, I don't know if other individuals do it, but I will fixate, and that's part of my perfectionistic tendency. So I cannot drop it. I used to be so bad at like, I can only do one task at a time. I couldn't multitask. So now taking breaks and doing something I enjoy or talking with someone, navigating the scenario really helps me come back and realize actually maybe I was done a few hours ago and I can leave it alone. This one also comes with time, but practicing and exercising confidence. I'm generally speaking a very confident person. I exude that. I don't know how, especially in moments where I know I'm unconfident, people still perceive that about me. So that is something that I've been told. And so because I'm told it seems to be an attribute, I kind of try and navigate the space of how do I exercise it so that I believe it too. And then when I am feeling more confident, I don't need to be perfect because I'm confident in the work I'm providing. Giving myself time limits as well kind of goes back to that large or short list. Given that, again, I can fixate, I don't want to be up till 4 a.m. losing out on important sleep when I could have been done maybe at 11 p.m. in bed. I also found new hobbies, and I think we've kind of touched on this earlier, but new hobbies or interests or connections or just really anything that helps me feel good about myself aside from associating it with an achievement or a direct outcome, as I think Trinity said. So those are some things that have helped me. I'm sure it's not an exhaustive list, but this is all my brain could come up with when I was reflecting to do this talk. So some takeaways. I'm gonna just repeat it here. So you're going to have failures, but you're also going to have successes, and you are not defined by any mistakes as a failure. You can be successful and will have successes. Again, this is just part of the disclaimer I gave already, but seek help from a professional if you think your perfectionism is all-consuming, because it could be a sign of an underlying mental health concern. Again, not all perfectionistic tendencies stem from an underlying something, but if you do feel like it is disruptive for yourself, seeking a therapist. But I also will relay what Michaela says, and I think therapy is great any and all the time. And then just try to learn to catch your perfectionistic tendencies, specifically ones that end up bothering you, and then try to navigate away from them when you do catch them. So again, bringing awareness to yourself and seeing if you can create a shift in your mindset. And change your mindset. So shift your mindset and get comfortable with imperfection. This again will happen over time. And these are mantras you can kind of tell yourself. Just in general, as it relates to grad school, there's no right way or correct timeline to get into grad school. If you're meant to be there, you will get there when it's your time. And so I know that some individuals feel discomfort in talking about, well, I've applied twice or 3 times or more. But just know that, I mean, I had a classmate who applied 4 times and now she's 1. So it is one of those things where you'll get there when it's your time. And it's okay to not follow the same timeline you perceive everyone else might be doing, because they're probably not anyway. So some exercises that I thought of, also just a hint, like start today, could be fun. For the first one, I thought of, okay, so like consider the people, actually, I think Michaela came up with this one. I forgot which order I did it in. Consider people in your life. What value do they have that's outside of their scholastic or trade skills? And then consider what you value about these individuals that you care about. And again, correlate, like, what is it about them, and are they even related to trade skills or scholar? And then reflect on your own value given what you thought about with your friends. So kind of apply it to yourself and then uncouple your own values, your own value of yourself from your performance. All right. Exercise 2. So when you're participating in something that you're aware is going to be a trigger for you, ask yourself what's the worst that could happen. You are going to probably think the worst. Like someone else might be like, oh, I don't know, get a B. And you might be like, I can never leave the house again. Like, so you're going to have the unrealistic and dramatic ones. Try to sift through ones that can actually be realistic. And then allow yourself to kind of feel relief, knowing that honestly, okay, it's not as bad as you initially were imagining these unrealistic outcomes. And then if you do end up kind of still struggling with that, definitely take a break, stop overworking, obsessing, take a break so that you can, and then, kind of start from number 1 again and try to get to number 3. And then lastly, this one's kind of similar, but when you catch yourself being overly critical of yourself, ask, okay, well, what am I doing well? I kind of just actually even gave an example of one that I did very recently. So if you're telling yourself like, I can't believe I made a blank mistake, I'm so dumb, mentally or verbally, depending on how you think, list or talk to yourself, like say the things that you're doing well. And then if you can't come up with things you're doing well, again, take a break from whatever it is you're doing, because you are definitely doing things well. And then give yourself the space and the grace to feel proud of yourself, because you really are amazing as you are and deserve to feel proud of yourself. And then just in general, where are you going to go from here? If you feel comfortable, share your stories with us. We would definitely love to hear how you're doing, what unique ways you're doing to manage your perfectionistic tendencies. You might be doing something completely different to the things that are on my list, and I might learn something that you're doing and be like, wow, that sounds great. I kind of want to add that to my life. So feel free to share with us if you feel comfortable. Connect with us through, Instagram. I believe our emails are somewhere on the GC Prep page as well. So yeah, definitely feel free if you feel comfortable.
Yeah, you guys can reach us at support@gcprepllc.com. Those emails come directly to me. I answer them. Instagram, Facebook, for the most part. We're also on Twitter, and there's some stuff on LinkedIn. But remember, you're not in this space applying alone, and already getting to this point where we're at the beginning of January, you have already put massive amounts of effort into your application. So like that is something to be proud of, right? So regardless of what happens after today, whether you get interviews or don't get interviews, whether you match or not match, the amount of effort you put in is something to be proud of, right? And so if we're uncoupling success from value, right? We're not going to look at the specific outcome of did I get an interview, did I match, and we're going to be proud of the amount of effort and like mental fortitude that you had to apply so far, right? So that's an example of the uncoupling. Now, of course, outcomes are important for our goals, right? That's how we achieve our goals, is we do meet certain benchmarks over time. And just remember that you're not in this space by yourself, right? GC Prep is here. We can do mock interviews with you. We can help you practice. We can, both Jessa and one of our other coaches, Jessica, are life coaches, right? And they're trained not only as genetic counselors, but also life coaches to help you kind of like navigate this space. And they're available to help you out. So I don't want you guys to feel that you're on an island alone trying to get to where you're going, because we're all like, we're here to help you. That's why we made GC Prep. So if you're struggling with anything, if you have any questions, let us know, and we can see what we can do to get you there. Okay. Any final questions or thoughts or concerns?
I'll just say I thought this was, I think I've said this before about other webinars, but thank you for making this free, first of all. It's definitely helpful because this process is crazy and expensive. And it was nice to actually have a conversation, but all of your webinars are always like very well timed. I think you did one that was like how to write your personal statement, and it was at a time where I was like in the depths and was like, it was a good time for me to revisit it and have a clear head. And this was really nice too, because getting caught up in applications, it's like, where am I excelling? Where am I not? And like, you're focusing on the areas where you're doing really well, but then the areas where you're like, oh, but I know that's my weak point. So I think this was aptly timed with like submitting applications and then kind of clearing my head, hopefully before interviews. So thank you all for your time.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for coming.
Reminded me like something like when I was applying, I know it kind of goes along with perfectionistic tendencies, but it's like others' expectations of you. So I know I remember like every time I was like, okay, but like I realistically might not get in. Can we talk about that? No. You're so smart. Anyone would love to have you in their program. I'm like, yes, and I could realistically.
I might not match. Yeah.
Yeah, that's exhausting.
Yeah, and so that's also kind of where one of the focuses I have in how I do coaching or mentoring individuals is being that sounding board of trying to support when other individuals are just telling you, oh, like, don't worry about it, but you can worry about it and you can tell me about it and I can empathize. I will know because I have been there.
I want to share one of my thoughts is I think everything happened, or all the efforts we spend like in the past will become something useful we need to use in the future, even we didn't match or even we didn't become a genetic counselor in future. Like there's the other day I talked with my friend. She was telling me like because of working from home, she didn't really get a chance to talk to the colleagues. Her English skill goes down. So she asked me about it. And I was like, even I'm at home because I'm writing a lot of personal stories, I think it improved my English. So, I mean, here we go. Like even the outcome, we don't know like for the genetic counseling, if we get in or not, but I think the efforts we use will benefit us in the future.
Absolutely. And even going through this process, if match day comes and you don't match, like, I'm not going to pretend that's not going to be like super disappointing. It totally would be, you know, for people who don't match. Like that is a reality that some people are not going to match. But what you do after that day is going to say a lot more about you as a person than about your match, than what your match status says, right? Because some people will take that match day and the devastation that they feel of not matching, and some might say like, my dreams are crushed. This is something I can never achieve. I should give up now. And they go do something else. Other people can be devastated and be like, that didn't work out, but you know what? what do I really want out of my life? If it's still to be a genetic counselor, I will try again, and I'll take everything I've learned from last time and I'll like apply the things that I've learned, and I'll do things differently next time. And they learn from that not matching experience. And STEM still are able to reflect, what do I really want out of my life? I didn't match this time, but I'm not a failure. Do I really want to be a genetic counselor? And if the answer is honestly no, then they might be able to happily move on to something else, right? So holding these thoughts in our head and uncoupling the outcome from our value allows us to transition between the phases of our life in a much more healthy way, right? We have these periods that can be like really emotionally difficult. Even mentally healthy people have times that are super difficult for them, right? But if we take steps now to prepare for these outcomes, to make sure that our like how we think about ourselves are not tied up in whether you match or not, and what that future is exactly going to look like, then come match day, even if it's not the outcome we want, then we know we're going to be in a more firm position. We know we're going to be in a more stable and steady place on which to make decisions about what the next steps are for you, whether that's to try again or whether it's to move on to something else that you're interested in. Okay. Thank you guys so much for sharing. I really appreciate that. Any other thoughts?
No, I just wanted to thank you all for putting this webinar together. I attended one back in September. I think that was about just staying organized with the application season. And I think for me, what's been like particularly hard with waiting for like interviews is, I think like, I could be wrong, but I find that a lot of applicants or first-time applicants, and this is my first time too, is they're still not done with undergrad. And so they might be like 21, 22, and I'm currently 24. And I know that's like not really old by any standard, but it kind of like, I start like worrying a lot about the idea of not matching. And then if I like, apply for the second time, I'll be like 25 going on 26, and it just, I don't know. I don't know if you guys have any like thoughts about that. I'm sorry, I know we're going over time. Like this, like the idea of, yeah, I guess it goes back to the timeline and what Jessa was saying, that it doesn't have to be like imposed.
Yeah, everybody's got their own timeline. I'll tell you right now, I have people that I'm coaching. Some of them are finishing up their undergrad, so they are like 21 or 22. I've got someone who's 36. I've got people in between. And when I was a student, I started my program when I was 24. I had classmates that were younger than me, classmates that were older than me. So personally, age doesn't matter so much. It's more like the mental maturity of the person applying, because I've definitely known people who are in their like 30s and I'm like, you are super immature. You're not ready to go to grad school to be a genetic counselor. And there are other people who, are finishing up their undergrad degree and they do have that mental maturity. So it's admissions, and Janelle and Jesse, you can comment on this as well, but admissions is more looking for people who seem emotionally and mentally ready to take on the tasks of becoming a student, which are to try hard, to fail, and to accept feedback and try to be better the next time, right? So they're really looking for people who can give it a shot. And when we suck at it, because it's the first time we've ever done it, then it's like, oh, well, that's how not to do it. So next time I'll try again, and that'll also be how to not do it, but I'll learn a little bit more each time I try. And in some ways, age, and that often goes along with more experience, just life experience, can be beneficial because you've had more opportunity to suck at something and still go for it, right? And so I wouldn't, just based on age alone, I wouldn't feel insecure about that at all. Now, if you're insecure about other things, like I want to start my career as soon as possible, like the timing of the other things I want to do in my life, like that's a separate issue. But when it comes to, you know, how appropriate it is to do grad school at 24 or 25, like I see no issues with it. But yeah, Jessa, your thoughts?
Yeah, I had a very diverse cohort as well. Like I was actually the youngest, and I want to say our oldest, it's not old, but the member who had more age above all of us was, I can't remember if she was 35 when she started or 37 when she started, and then 37 when she finished, but she was mid to upper 30s by the time she was a practicing genetic counselor. And then I will say, I don't think personally this has to do with age for me, but I did not take a gap year. And this kind of goes back to what Corinne was saying, is like, I genuinely, like I was 1 month in and something happened that made me think, like before this thing happened, I was like, oh man, should I have taken a break? And I think I should have taken a break. But I didn't. And I got through it. But again, it goes back to like, you're signing up for something that's difficult. And while the programs knew I was ready, I felt ready. And then I started and I was like, was I? So I don't think that's an age thing. That's just a, oh, wow, I signed up for something and I knew it was going to be hard, but now I'm seeing it. But yeah, I honestly, the classmate that was older than all of us, just as a person, I was like, man, I would love for her to be my genetic counselor. Like, I just loved her. So I don't think age really matters. Like when you get in, you're meant to be there and you're going to make a great counselor.
So I will just add that we've had students from right out of undergrad to people who are in their 50s, have grown children. Some have even had grandchildren when they've entered, they're in their 50s. So yeah, I just kind of laughed when you said your age, just because I've seen the gamut in terms of like student age. And I would, honestly, my initial thought is like, this is life. You don't, there isn't a playbook. No one is telling you you need to do it in this order and at this age and at this time. It really is what you want to do with your life and what makes the most sense to you. And for some people, I'll say, as someone who's trained students, some of the most interesting people to have in the classroom and then to eventually have as colleagues are people who have just had life in between, before they got to grad school and like undergrad. They've just like lived. They just lived, had life, and did some things. And it's not bad. It doesn't have to be a straight line. There could be a lot of other things that go on. So you're totally fine. It is normal for you to be the age that you are. Every single person who's on here, every single person who's watching the recording, you're the appropriate age.
Yep. So, I don't want to keep you guys too long. I just want like a couple quick announcements, right? We have another webinar coming up mid-January that's on interview prep. So we'll talk about some of the questions, how to prepare for them, what kind of answers. Not like what are they looking for, right? Because you don't want to give canned answers, but we're going to talk about like how answers are like valued, like what's important in an answer, like what makes something a good answer that is appealing to program directors and other people interviewing you. So don't miss that. That's also going to be recorded though. And then I know right at this time it's like super uncomfortable because you've applied and now you're like in limbo while you're waiting for interviews, invitations to come in, and it's a very uncomfortable time. Waiting is like the worst part of life, in my opinion, because there's no like reward for waiting, right? You can't be like, yes, I was patient, I get the reward of the thing I want. No, you don't, because you gotta be patient for it. Like, it's really hard for me. So keep in mind that probably in the next couple of weeks or so, invitations are going to start being sent out. But many schools might do that in batches. So they might send out invitations, and then a couple weeks later, they might send out more invitations, right? And the chat rooms, like the applicant chat rooms during interview season, get incredibly unhealthy. So just people like, just the anxiety is through the roof, and people like obsessing. So I recommend limiting the amount of time that you spend in those chat rooms just for your own mental health during this whole process. And just because the applicant groups are like documenting, oh, this school sent out invitations and I got one, and you applied there and didn't get one, that doesn't mean you're not going to get an interview. You just might be in a different batch, right? So do everything that you can at this time to protect your mental health, because like this is the final leg of this marathon that you've been doing. And so it's appropriate for you to be selfish with what you need to make sure that you maintain your mental health, and you know, what you need to do to feel good at this stage of the application process. Okay, so again, any questions or concerns, go ahead and email us, and we will do what we can to help you out there. Okay. Thank you so much, everyone, for coming. We really appreciate it. And we hope to see you in mid-January for our next webinar. Take care.